In this C++ video, we're going to take a first look at FireMonkey 3D programming. To do 3D, you say File, New, C++ Builder, Desktop Application, and you can choose High Definition or 3D. So we'll choose the 3D FireMonkey application. And now we've got a 3D form. We can take a look underneath, and it says it's a form that inherits from T-Form 3D. So that's the starting point of our application. And with FireMonkey, there are all sorts of layers and shapes and other things that are related to 3D. There's 3D scene components where you can have a camera, a light, a dummy, and a proxy object. We'll talk about those later on. You've got a bunch of 3D shapes: T-plane, T-disc, cube, mesh, sphere, cylinder, rounded cube, cone, and so on. Some text 3D, ellipse, and you can even load a model. And there's some layers that you can put on 3D, a buffer layer, splitter 3D, solid layer, image 3D, T-layer 3D, and a text layer 3D. Let's just work with the 3D space to start and put some shapes in there. So we can put, for example, a sphere. And here's our sphere, and we can make it any size that we want and place it wherever we want on the screen. Defaults to size 1 by 1 by 1 for the height, width, and depth properties. You can also set a scale factor to scale each of the 3D objects. They start out with 1, 1, and 1 for the XY. So if we want to scale this sphere larger, then we've got a sphere. And notice it comes out starting with the color red by default. And the way we can change the color of the sphere is by using a property called the material source. And over here in the component palette, we've got a material source. And there's 3 different material sources: a color material source, a light material source, and a texture material source. In this first video, we'll keep things simple, and we'll put a color material source down. And in the color material source, it's in the object inspector, we can choose a color. So for example, royal blue. And then going back to the sphere, we can simply choose that material source, color material source 1, and we now have a royal blue sphere. We can put some other objects down, for example, a cube. And we can rotate and move that cube around. There's these little handle grippers for 3D objects for rotating and setting the rotation angle. And we can go in and set a material source and make this one royal blue if we want. Nice thing about these material sources is they're stored inside the GPU, and so they can be used along the way. Now I've got this cube parented. Let's put it not parented with the sphere. And let's go and change its scale factor to maybe 3, 3, and 3. Let's go and create another material source, choose a different color, and let's associate that with the cube. So go back to the cube and set its material source to be color material source 2, and now it's red. So nice thing about these material sources, number one, they get stored in the GPU just like the 3D shapes, and then you can manipulate them there. We can go either inside of the object inspector, we can set whatever colors we want, and then we can use the designer. Now, inside of a 3D form, there is a property called Use Design Camera. And when that's set to true, that says whatever you see on the form at design time, you're going to see at runtime. So if I run this sample, I get the exact same look at runtime as I do at design time. We can also set the position property of where these are. Notice that as I move them around, the X, Y, and, well, I don't have a 3D designer, so if I want to move them closer or farther away, I can set the Z property. And so we've got X. As we move them to the right, notice X is getting less minus, so negative to the left and positive to the right. And notice it's cutting through that shape. That's pretty cool. And positive Y to the bottom and negative Y to the top. So you can see as I move them around, the value's changing. Now for the Z-axis, we can just set the value. Z-axis is positive into the screen. Notice the sphere moved away from us. And minus moves it closer to us or out of the screen. And we can put other shapes. Here's a cylinder. And we'll set its scale factor to, we'll also add a color material source. And for the sphere, we'll set its material source to be material source 3. set a different color, maybe make it yellow-green, for example. Now, there are other shapes that have multiple material sources. So let's go back here and let's put a rectangle, 3D, and let's move its position to be further away. Let's make it 10. So it's off in the distance here. Notice that a rectangle has 3 different material sources. We've got here the back material source. So let's set that to color 1. It's in the back side, so we don't see it yet. We'll set the shaft to be color material source 2. And now notice purple is along the shaft, which is the sides of the 3D rectangle. And then the material source for what you can see, we'll set that to material source 3. And we can now rotate this around and see the back side. There's the back side. There's the front side. We can move it down. And so depending on the shape, it might have one or more material source. And again, we can run this application on Windows. We can also run this on 64-bit Windows and on Macintosh. So here's our OS X. Let's make sure we're connected. And we're connected, so we can go and run this application on the Macintosh. And here's our 3D application running on the Mac. So in this case, I was using the design time camera. If I go to the forum, for example, and I turn off using the design camera, I'll set it to false. If we run this example back on Windows, since there's no camera, we don't see anything. So now let's add a camera into the scene, and we can put that camera somewhere and then run it. And now that we have a camera, depending on where that camera is pointing, so it's pointing sort of towards and by the side of the cylinder and the 3D rectangle. Let's move the camera further away. It's positioned currently -5, so let's move it further away from the scene. And let's run this application again. And now we see a little more. We see the sphere, and we see the cylinder and part of the rectangle. We can also take that camera and we can set it at a specific target. So maybe point it at the sphere, and now the sphere is at the center of the screen. So we can do lots of work with cameras, with lights, and other things. I just wanted to introduce you to using some of the 3D aspects of FireMonkey and C++ Builder. In this case, all of this without any specific code. One of the other things we can do is rotate an object. And so we might, for example, put a float animation on the rectangle. And let's put the rectangle out of the cube. And we'll set the property name that we want to change over time to be the rotation angle of the rectangle. Let's move this cube out of the way and make this rectangle a little bigger. And we can tell it we want to not only take the rotation angle Y and rotate it. Let's rotate it in a circular fashion. So we'll put the stop value to be 360, and we'll set the duration to be a rotation of 3 seconds. Let's set it in a loop, and we'll enable the camera to point. So target, right, rectangle, 3D. And now as it's rotating around, we're seeing the different sides of the 3D rectangle, the back, the front, and the shaft. All of this work is being done by the GPU. And we're using FireMonkey, again, with no lines of code. Of course, in C++, we could write code. We could associate clicks, for example. Maybe what we want to do on this animation is set it disabled. And then when we click on the rectangle 3D, we'll go and set the enabling of the animations. We'll set float animation 1. So we'll set its enabled property when we click on it to true to start it rotating. When we click on it, we've got a rotating. So then instead of having it just enable true, we can go and change the code to be setting it to whatever it currently isn't. So if it's true and it's rotating, then if we click on it again, it'll stop. Click on it, start the rectangle 3D rotating, click on it to stop. Again, that's just a quick introduction to doing 3D FireMonkey operations with shapes and animations in C++ Builder.